They were the first Australian out-and-out rock band. I mean, they didn't play anything else but rock.
What AC/DC have always done is so simple and straightforward. Yet, whenever anybody else tries to do it, they sound like a second-rate pub band. AC/DC always sound world-class.
Their trademark sound was this raw, in-your-face, but very well-polished and rockin' sound that just made people want to get up and jump to their music.
One of the best things that AC/DC have shown us is that you don't have to be clever, you don't have to use funny timings or complicated guitar chords to make a good rock song.
The Bon Scott years just showed more of their raw talent, which is what they were full of those first 3, 4, 5 years.
AC/DC is very much Malcolm Young's band. Always was, always will be. He was the guy who put the band together initially. He was in a band called Velvet Underground, would you believe, back in Australia, in Sydney, in the early 70s. And when they split up, he put together a new band, and one of the people he brought in was his kid brother Angus.
They got their name in quite a funny way. Their sister actually noticed AC/DC written on a sewing machine, and they decided to call themselves AC/DC. But apparently, she had must have had quite a bit of influence, because she also was the one who suggested to Angus that he should start wearing his little school uniform and stuff.
He was only 15 when he joined the band, and when they started, he used to run from school to play on stage in Australia. And so she said, well, just why don't you leave your uniform on? And that's actually why he actually wore it. It wasn't actually some big commercial, let's see if we can find a gimmick. It's actually something he's been lumbered with.
One thing that worked in AC/DC's favour in the early days was the fact that there was a company in existence called Albert Productions, which was run by the eldest Young brother, George Young, along with Harry Vanda. So there was this ready-made little organisation to kickstart AC/DC's career.
Albert did quite a good job in the beginning, because they were an indie label that had major distribution. I think they did quite well as far as setting them up and helping the band to break in Australia.
The defining moment came when Bon Scott hooked up with AC/DC, been in a couple of bands in Australia before, Fraternity and the Valentines.
He became a roadie for the band, even played drums for AC/DC, and actually did say at one point, I think I could do a better job than Dave Evans. Give me a shot. Let me have a go. I think I'm a better singer.
Dave Evans, the singer, who had been pretty reliable up to that point apparently, failed to turn up to a gig one night. Bon seized his opportunity and, superseded Dave Evans at the microphone and got on with business. And I think all of a sudden, that was the magical element. That was the last piece of the jigsaw as far as AC/DC were concerned.
They also came to the attention of a guy called Michael Browning, who was the manager of the Hard Rock Cafe at the time, who became their manager. And with professional representation, having someone who could pull the strings in terms of getting gigs, as well as George Young and his partner Harry Vanda behind the scenes musically, DC started to move forward. They started to get known in the local scene, and a buzz started to be created.
So for High Voltage, obviously the first AC/DC album, albeit only issued in Australia initially. AC/DC weren't really a proper band at that point. Bon had just joined on vocals. They had a guy called Tony Carranti on drums, who's an unknown figure, didn't figure in subsequent AC/DC releases. You got George Young, the eldest young brother, helping out on the bass.
The first album that they released was basically a lot of stuff that they used to play live. A lot of just cover tunes. You know, Baby Please Don't Go, which is a classic blues track, and they would do that, and I think that was just to sort of introduce them to the studio, introduce them to try to get that raw feel that they had live. Can we bring it in the studio? Are they going to get it with their own originals? Probably not, but they had a few, but mainly doing cover tunes just to show what they did live on stage, but tried to emulate that in the studio, which I don't think they quite captured on the first album.
Not a great record, although it has certain wonderful moments. Their cover of Baby Please Don't Go is excellent. You Ain't Got a Hold of Me, superb on that record as well. But it's a little bit patchy and a little bit primitive.
Listening to it now, it does sound pretty much like a bad AC/DC covers band, I think. You've got the elements there, and it's plain that the foundations for the band are being built at that point.
Like an early Stones album, or like early anything, it had great value. You can't devalue something just because it isn't polished. It had Angus and Malcolm and the band playing well, and it had some great vibe to it. Yes, of course there were great songs and there were not so good songs, but that goes with anything.
I love you. Oh, I love you. Oh, baby, please, please don't go.
Production's pretty lightweight. You know, some of the playing is a bit laboured, as you would expect, because, you know, you've only got 3/5 of a proper band there, really. So you can't really read too much into that as a debut effort, and after all, it was a debut effort only for the Australian market at that point.
It's not a fantastic introduction to the band, but having a domestic release, an album out, gave them that opportunity to spread the word far further around what is a huge country.
After the release of their first album, it didn't make them superstars worldwide. It did make them local stars in Australia. But again, this was because they would play so many festivals, they would play any kind of venue. It could be a country venue, it could be a gay venue. They would play birthday parties. They would just play as many gigs as they possibly could.
T.N.T. is the first proper AC/DC album to me, because by that point Phil Rudd was behind the kit, Mark Evans was on bass. They had the first classic lineup really of AC/DC. This is a lineup that everyone got to know and right, DC have arrived. And it's also full of fantastic songs.
I think T.N.T. is a much better album than High Voltage. You know, this is, I think, where the whole AC/DC ethic was beginning to gel.
The title track to T.N.T. was "It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll," and that became almost a seminal track. Just everyone could sing along to that. They were also probably talking about how hard it is to break it, rock and roll wise.
What a great opening to an album. And how many other bands would have thought about having a bagpipe in there? But it did have Bon in there who could play bagpipes, so it helped a little bit.
It just showed potentially, especially Angus's guitar playing. For a kid of that age, it was ridiculous. I mean, he just got better and better. And he had one thing that Van Halen had, and all the great guitarists, he had a style that is really just his.
The first thing about Angus Young is that he's very small physically. He's tiny. I mean, there's nothing of the guy. And so when you see him holding the guitar, you know, you see my hands on the fretboard, but if you look at him when he plays an SG, which is a similar type guitar to this, his hands look tiny on the fretboard, and it's like he's like a child, you know, he can hardly get his hand around it. So, you know, first and foremost, it can't be easy for him to play like that the way he does. He's very blues orientated, and you know, he doesn't try and do all this clever stuff. He feels what he plays, but he's also quite quick when he does it, kind of thing. And it's all just straight down the line, sort of bluesy rock and roll, you know.
The T.N.T. album, I think their influence was the 50s and 60s rock and roll, which is what they grew up on. A lot of the lyrics were tongue-in-cheek, which kind of showed Bon Scott's humorous side and that having a good time side. Even you know, High Voltage is very, very reminiscent of T-Rex and Bang a Gong. So I think what they did is they just kind of like stole some of their favorite riffs and sounds to those songs, or their influences of the 50s and 60s, and brought it to that album.
Ironically, you got a song called High Voltage, which should have presumably have been in the first album, the High Voltage album, but ended up on T.N.T.
The ones that I really like are School Days and High Voltage. They, to me, are the great songs. I mean, there are other songs on it, but those were just, they gave a real direction of where the band were going. They, you know, if you listen to those now, and then you listen to something much later on, you can see where it's going.
Bon Scott's songwriting abilities had taken a quantum leap, really, from the early album. You know, he was really coming on strong as you know, sort of bare-chested, you know, fist-fighting guy that he would subsequently become.
Bon Scott was the playboy of the band. If you've seen him, he's not the greatest looking guy in the world, but he was so respected by the working class men. He had a lot of tattoos, he looked kind of rough, a few teeth missing. He's the kind of guy you'd party with, the kind of guy you'd want on your side if a fight broke out. But all the women loved him as well, because he was this great performer. He was the guy on stage, no shirt, hairy chest, showing off his tattoos, and then singing about this song and then going backstage. Whereas the Young brothers, I'm sure, had a bit of fun in the early days. They preferred to have a cup of tea, while Bon Scott would prefer to have 2 bottles of vodka and hang out with the girls to see if they did indeed have the jack.
She's on the jack. She's on the jack. You know, baby. She's on the jack. 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 She's on the jack.
The Jack, which is one of the first really clever Bon Scott tracks. It's about a game of cards, or is it? And it's a very cleverly written song.
The Jack is a real tongue-in-cheek song about venereal disease. Listening to the song, if you didn't know that, you'd think it's about Bon Scott partaking in some Las Vegas poker tournament or card tournament. And it was very well written as a funny little tongue-in-cheek song.
But it sounds like they did a jam, and he probably ad-libbed some lyrics around it, and then they constructed the song around it, and then he went away and rewrote the lyrics.
Bon was writing the script, and he wrote about life. And it's brilliant because you can laugh, you can cry, but you really get an insight. And the rawness went straight into that music, didn't it? He's like a poet, isn't he? He's like a modern day poet.
Don't give it to me. Oh, stick it right up, stick it right up.
You listen to that, that is just a straightforward, slow blues thing, but it's a real crowd pleaser because it's one of them songs when they do it live that everybody sings along with.
We got a cue up there right now. Check out guitar and ass.
It introduced his style, which was, if you see many photos of him or see him perform, his sneer and his half speaking, half singing, telling a story, which of course sometimes performers would stop to do, but he would just do it in song.
Had the jack on it, had high voltage. Just T.N.T. actually became an anthem and for kids almost, and you know, kids would be singing that, chanting T.N.T. is rock and roll. You know, what sort of more rock can you get than that?
That first chord of T.N.T. just immediately it made you sit up to say, who's this? What is this?
T.N.T. will always be along with Highway to Hell and all those. It'll always be one that people want. And I think T.N.T. is always going to be part of their set. They don't do it all the time now, not all the time, but it'll always be in the things they have to do, like Satisfaction with the Stones, like anything really.
It's just an album full of great rock and roll songs, and you listen to it now and it stands up really well. And it's a shame in a way that album wasn't released in its entirety as the first proper high voltage release.
Their first major sign was with Atlantic, and Atlantic actually moved them to London, relocated them, and they were by now really popular on the Australian scene. Atlantic saw the talent in them and thought they could do something with them, because in England at the time there was not really anything like them happening, and so they brought them over to London and promoted them that way.
By the time the European market picked up on them, Atlantic in America picked up on them and signed them, they were already 2 or 3 albums down the line. So, like they do actually, English bands have done that as well, is they take the best of the first 2 albums from the home market and they put them into one album for the overseas markets, hoping that it'll have more impact. And 9 times out of 10 it does.
It's interesting that when those 2 albums, which were for the Australian market only, T.N.T. and High Voltage, when they were bolted together for the worldwide market, there are only a couple of tracks on High Voltage that actually turned up on the 2 albums that were mixed. So that sort of leads you to believe that the band took a serious look at the 2 initial Australia-only releases, kind of assessed their qualities and thought, well, hang on a minute, this first one maybe wasn't quite so good, so maybe we'll just squeeze in a little bit from that. But really, High Voltage, not so great. T.N.T., that's the way we're going forward.
Yeah, the High Voltage album was the worldwide release, which was, of course, the 2 thinned-out versions of the previous 2 albums. That was the album that introduced them to the world. It wasn't the album that made you go, wow, this is absolutely fantastic, but it was a great album to start with.
It was a funny time for the music industry at that time in the mid to late 70s, because a lot of the classic rock bands were dying out. Disco was coming in big, and so was punk. And so if you were a rock band at that time, they'd associate you with punk music. And AC/DC didn't like that at all and wanted to just completely disassociate themselves from punk music.
But that punky thing, I think, helped AC/DC to a large extent, because they weren't bracketed with the tired old rockers of a bygone age that Johnny Rotten would pontificate about. So the fact that it had this aggression, and the fact that they weren't pigeonholed necessarily with the heavy rockers of the past, I think once again was a very, very good thing for them.
AC/DC had a very straightforward, boogie, hard-rocking, driving energy that could come across to anyone into rock and roll. If you were a Rolling Stones fan, if you were a Dr. Feelgood fan, if you were a Sex Pistols fan, there was something about AC/DC you could pick up on. And also if you were a Led Zeppelin fan, or if you were a fan, even strangely enough, of Yes, there was something about AC/DC that made them appeal universally.
They were their own band. I don't suppose they even cared what the Sex Pistols single was, or The Damned, or you know, Yes, or Led Zeppelin. I'm sure Led Zeppelin perhaps, you know, but no, it was music that was original. It came from somewhere other than England, and it hit you in the face, and we're AC/DC and you watch us.
And there's this one rock band, maybe the only rock band for people to get a taste of, and that's why they set London and the UK alight, because of this style of music. If you weren't into the punk scene, at least you had these saviors who could still entertain you with great rock sounds.
They were doing really well, and they came over here, they did a few concerts, got very well received. The papers, you know, at the time Sounds was still going with Jeff Barton, who ended up editing Kerrang. He picked up on them really big time. Tommy Vance picked up on them big time. Late radio stations picked up on them big time. All the rock magazines picked up on them, and they generally got very well received.
I was working on Sounds Music Weekly at that particular time, and we were approached by Atlantic Records to say that would we like to sponsor a tour by this band AC/DC from Australia. We knew nothing about the band at all. So we went down to the Atlantic offices, and they showed us a film of AC/DC. Just AC/DC doing their thing in a scruffy Australian club. And we thought, they're absolutely brilliant. You know, we've got to get behind this band, even though we knew absolutely nothing about them. So we sponsored a tour called the Sounds AC/DC Lock Up Your Daughters tour of the UK, which was about a dozen dates, I suppose. Climaxed at London's Lyceum, and it took off from there.
They played a lot of big festivals as well. This is before they became their own superstar status. And again, what they did in the UK is what they did in Australia. They just played and played and played.
We put AC/DC on our cover, you know, we put Angus on our cover. Nobody knew who the hell this boy was, you know, this little school kid. And I think the cover line was, would you give a job to this school leaver? But it paid dividends, it paid big dividends for Sounds and obviously AC/DC.
It certainly got them off on the right footing. That, combined with the early gigs that they did, got the buzz going, and people were saying, have you seen that band? They're amazing. And the kid in a schoolboy uniform. Wow.
Definitely a breath of fresh air. A mammoth breath of fresh air. You could go to the gig, get hammered, have a laugh, and you still could enjoy it. It wasn't like, you know, be serious, very dark, very, you know, very introvert. It was the opposite of all that. It was like, it's a party.
It's like a town. Don't you mistake around.
I went to the Marquee Club, and I met them. And it was, well, what's the thing? I thought, oh, brilliant. This is the type of music I like. It was like completely not like, there was no chorus here, or let's not worry, where's the lead break coming? It was like, it came at you like a train. So I went there and I thought, my name's Pete Way, I'm playing UFOs, like, yeah, see what type of thing. And it's like I became friendly with them.
So High Voltage over a period of time started to sell, but it certainly wasn't a chart-topping album.
It wasn't yet classic AC/DC, but it was still good. And then when Dirty Deeds came out, it was more, definitely they were maturing more and finding their way a bit more. and it contained some classic songs that are still in their live set today, such as Dirty Deeds and Problem Child.
Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, I think that title really sums up the AC/DC ethic at that time. It's the kind of album, if you pick it up, you want to put it back down again and wash your hands, because it's such a filthy, scummy, aggressive, you know, barroom brawl of an album.
The songwriting was good. I think Vanda and Young were actually getting their heads around what they needed the band to sound like. Angus's playing he was older, 18, 19, getting older, getting more mature, you know what I mean? And the whole band was, you know, Bon Scott was flying, you know, he was lyrically flying, he was flying every time he had a drink. No, but he was into it. It was a great, the band were now cohesive, they played well together, and I think that they really started to sound special.
Well, I'm upper class, high society, God's gift to ballroom notoriety. And I always fill my ballroom, the event is never small. The social pages say I've got the biggest balls of all. I've got big balls, I've got big balls. They're such big balls, and they're...
There isn't a bad song on the album. You can listen to it from beginning to end. And this is when the comical side or funny side of Bon Scott really came into play.
And my balls are always bouncing, and my ballroom always full, and everybody comes and comes again.
You got Love at First Feel, the title said it all, Squealer, Big Balls, which is a very double entendre song.
Big Balls is kind of funny. It comes out of nowhere, this kind of slow song with a heavy chorus. It's all very tongue-in-cheek.
Big balls, dirty big balls, and he's got big balls, and she's got big balls. But he's got the biggest balls of them all.
Dirty Deeds came along, and it really put the seal and the mark on what they were. The title track itself, it's a real sense of streetwise smut, as it were. It's a real sort of sleazy song.
The album title track almost became an anthem to follow T.N.T, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Got a lot of rockin' connotations, down and dirty connotations with that.
A lot of the songs about sex, violence, rock and roll, which is what they wrote about.
In typical style of them, it's just basic chords strung together, but in a very catchy way. So with Dirty Deeds, you've got it going from an E to a G, back to the E, and then to an A to an E, and then from a D to an E, and it sounds like this. It's just the way they're all put together, you know. It's incredibly catchy and memorable kind of stuff, but it's not rocket science at all. But then that's, you know, the simple way is the best way.
Well, you having trouble with your high school head. He's giving you the blues. You want to graduate, but not this bed. Here's what you gotta do. Pick up the phone, I'm all alone. Just call me anytime. Dial 362436. I need a life of crime. Dirty deeds, done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds, done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds, done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds and done dirt cheap.
They're based around the most basic of chords that you have on the guitar. You know, like you have your main chords E, A, D, G, and you'd think that there'd only be a certain amount of combinations you can make with those chords, but you know, they never stop making these great riffs. Which is why when you're a beginner, when you're playing the guitar, you know, it's like the AC/DC riffs are some of the first that you learn because they're so easy to play.
I'll be happy to be your man. Dirty deeds, done dirt cheap.
You've also got Ain't No Fun Waiting Around to Be a Millionaire, which has got that wonderful line about get your jumbo jet off my lawn, which people to this day still smirk at the way it was actually put.
I don't think they were there yet with the V8 car and the money, which is what a lot of those songs talked about. So maybe a lot of those songs on Dirty Deeds were about their dreams of becoming millionaires. The song There's Gonna Be Some Rockin' is a fantastic blues song about them going to perform each and every night. You know, you set it up, we bring it down, playing all night, playing all these different clubs.
It's beginning to build up a catalogue of AC/DC classics, and I think that album shows the band more cohesively, and I think it's also a bit more Bon Scott driven.
Between High Voltage and Dirty Deeds, that they'd come on, they'd done a lot more shows, they'd started to tour and stuff like that. They'd started to play better together as a band, and you can hear that in Dirty Deeds.
There was also Jailbreak, was the out track which made it onto following albums. Problem Child was another one, and a lot of people must have gotten into Problem Child. It was all about throwing tantrums, causing havoc.
Again, typically in AC/DC fashion, just going between the main chords, and a lot like Dirty Deeds, where the riff keeps going back to the E. Problem Child goes back to the D quite a lot. It's just involving 3 chords, so it's kind of straightforward. It goes D, A, and D, G, and that's all it does for the main section of the song. So it goes. By Dirty Deeds, it was like they'd gone a bit more up tempo, and the riffs were a lot more direct and in your face, and a lot more catchy and memorable as well. And that's all really down to Malcolm Young, who's, although you see him on the stage, he just sort of stands there in the background by the drummer. He's really the brains behind the band.
Problem Child became very much Bon's anthem about being that sort of person that's difficult to deal with, but I'm going to go my own way and I don't really care what anyone else thinks. You've got The Rocker. Now, The Rocker, of course, was originally done for T.N.T. Why it was missed off the international release of High Voltage, I don't know, because it's a great song. But at least they made up for it by putting it on to Dirty Deeds rather than seeing it totally lost to posterity.
It's got a track called Ride On it, which is the most sensitive, most gentle, rolling rhythm, and that sort of, it's almost like the aftermath of that big barroom brawl. The dust has died down, people have picked themselves up, they've tended to their wounds, and they've got on their horse and they're off onto the horizon. It's just a great track, and subsequent to that, when Bon unfortunately died, a few years later, every tribute would say, "Ride on, Bon."
Standing on the edge of the road, thumb in the air. One of these days, I'm gonna change my evil ways. Till then, I'll just keep riding on.
You listen to the lyrics and they stand apart from anything else Bon Scott really wrote, because he's very much talking about the loneliness of being on the road, and it's very much done as a slow, bluesy paced song. And you've got lyrics like "You can always tell the day by the bottle in your hand," which other bands over the years have used, but somehow it really captures that for all his larger-than-life, gregarious activities, Bon Scott could be as lonely as anybody else, and there were moments when he really thought, why am I doing this?
Keep on riding. Riding on.
You put that record on now, it still sounds a good record. Okay, you know, maybe sounds aren't as high-tech and all that, but it still sounds like a great record, and they're playing really well. You know, 3 or 4 years on the road, tight, you know, there's a vibe in there. It's just a very well-constructed record.
It was a good, well-rounded, hard rock album, but it was setting them up for what was to come next.
The other interesting thing about Dirty Deeds is that America refused to release it. Didn't see any appeal for it, and they just said, nah, we're not putting it out. It came out 5 years later after Back in Black hit really big. That's when America decided, oh, we'll release this record now.
But they didn't release it because they probably didn't get it. And in America, they put out the high voltage thing, and probably because it didn't do what they expected it to do, they did what everyone else did, was they hung on, and then they went for the album after it. So that was left high and dry.
Let me introduce to you a band who have recently released a brand new album called Let There Be Rock, and that's the title of their single as well. And they're going to rock and roll for us right now. I don't know if that's part of the sound, but anyway, would you welcome, please, AC/DC.
I think AC/DC were the first ones to actually be as crass and as open as just saying something like, let there be rock. And there was rock.
Let There Be Rock is the moment when AC/DC really broke into an international band. It's a world-class album. It's just full of fantastic, fantastic music.
They wanted to rock, and they bloody well did, and they were telling you that they were about to do so.
Back in 1955, man didn't know about a rock and roll show and all that jive. The white man had the smalls, the black man had the blues, but no one knew what they was gonna do. But Tchaikovsky had the news. He said, "Let there be light."
It had more sort of classic AC/DC tracks on it. You know, Let There Be Rock is a great song when you listen to it. It sort of builds the whole thing, and when you watch it live, it's, you know, it's like he's telling you a story, and then when the chorus opens up, it all goes crazy.
Wow, let there be rock. Rock and roll.
To this day, you listen to it with that opening driving Angus guitar, and it just gets people just headbanging ferociously and furiously, because it is a very hard song, but it's also suddenly leans back into sort of going on about the birth of rock and roll. And there are very few songs that do it better than that and capture the imagination of what it was like to actually grow up at a time when rock and roll was first starting.
It's a terrible title for a song if you take it in isolation, but in AC/DC, that was a proclamation, it was a declaration of intent.
Let there be light. Sound. Drums. And guitar. Oh, let there be rock.
There is a video of Bon dressed as a preacher doing the song, which was a video at the time that the album was done. And Bon had this great way of presenting the song. And what he did was, it was almost like he was letting you come into this private conversation. Hey, come here, I'll tell you about the birth of rock and roll. Just sit down and I'll tell you all about it. Don't worry, just between us. But he had that intimate way of drawing people in. So you had that combination of that low-key element to the song and an absolute burst of energy which happens.
Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. That's another killer track. I think that conjures up once again their sort of anti-establishment, fuck you, all you people into God or whatever, I want to be in hell. Can't argue with that. That's what would have got them. They carried on throughout their albums, all these sort of tracks that just had these killer titles as far as making kids all, I like that title, I want to go and listen to that.
It's just a typical Bon Scott title. You know, you can imagine him, even to this day, you know, staggering into a bar and, you know, down in the Jack Daniels. And, you know, ironic given the manner of his death, but you can see him sort of spiralling into unconsciousness almost, and then coming up with this great line, "Hell ain't a bad place to be."
It's all in the rhythm, how they make each song sound different. If you look at Problem Child, you've got, and then if you look at Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, it's again, it's using the same three chords, but it's just another combination and doing something with the rhythm, you know, and they're still getting away with it.
Dirty Deeds, I think, is a great record, but somehow Let There Be Rock ups the ante. And that's probably purely because it contains the AC/DC anthem in Whole Lotta Rosie. You know, that's the song everybody remembers about AC/DC, even to this day with Brian Johnson in the band. AC/DC, Whole Lotta Rosie, it just sums it all up completely.
There's that main riff in that, which is just, again, a very simple riff just on the A string. And it's, rather than them putting different chords together, it's an actual riff kind of thing, you know. And so it's just from an open A up to a 3rd fret A and then a 5th fret A, but going back in between to the open A. So it's like, you know, that's it slow. But then up to speed, it's like, you know, and it just has that punch to it. It has the gap in the middle where the crowd are shouting Angus and stuff like that, and it gradually builds, and then the chorus is just it's all very straightforward stuff, but it's just that riff, you know, when they start it, everybody knows what song it is, you know.
Tell a story about the one I know. When they come to making love, Rosie steals the show. She knows something pretty, she knows something small. 4, 2, 3, 9, 5, 6. You can see she's there.
Whole Lotta Rosie is still to this day probably one of my favourite tracks. That is a track that just rocks. It has blues sort of rhythm and also, but with a heavy rock sort of undertones and attitude.
I believe it's this woman from Tasmania who was, you know, a pretty big girl, to be honest with you. And needless to say, Bon, you know, not possessing an ounce of taste or respectability, has it away with Rosie, you know, much to his delight, much to Rosie's delight, and it makes it into a song called Whole Lot of Rosie.
He sings brilliantly. Lyrically, it's obviously his song. You know, it's from the heart, and I think he sings it with so much passion that you can compare it with some of the Plant stuff. It's just really well sung. It's got just such texture and such emotion, and it's an easy song to listen to.
When Kerrang! Magazine was born in 1981, the very first issue of Kerrang! Had a poll. The greatest rock songs of all time. Number one, Whole Lot of Rosie. I think if you actually ran the same poll in 2005 or beyond, Whole Lot of Rosie would still be very much up there. It's got such a great chanting feel to it.
I don't think AC/DC's sound had changed substantially, you know, as their albums came out. I mean, all it was about was a bit more finesse, a bit more clever lyrical tricks as far as Bond was concerned, and a slight element of more maturity.
Let There Be Rock set them up for where they were wanting to go, and it was very important in actually doing that, because that's when they actually started to tour America in a big way, and the rest of the world. They were basically in America and flying over to Europe for dates and straight back to America. Probably got very little sleep from promoting that album.
Let There Be Rock was, to me, the first American breakthrough album. It's the one where they started to support loads of bands in America. They started to get stuck into the drudgery of getting down and doing 2 or 3 years in America. And although the Americans didn't release the last one, they released this one. And obviously why? Because they were going out there and touring.
AC/DC first time in, and it was great, because what the agency did, when they put the two bands together, it really made sense. Because you've got a band of UFO with the Dimensions and AC/DC, who actually, at the start of opening, or were our special guests, sort of thing, it was like in your face. So they'd do 60 minutes in your face, we'd come do the dynamics and that, and it was great. And it went across America, really.
They got exposed to a wider audience, like any good band, and then suddenly, yes, everyone thought, well, they're great. But actually, it's more of a revelation on our part than them getting better.
AC/DC, if you hadn't heard them before, because don't forget at that time we might have been on the radio for something that, I don't know, Too Hot to Handle or something like that. AC/DC weren't on the radio. So when they're coming in, people coming at 8 o'clock and AC/DC were on, I go, wow.
By then, you know, Zeppelin was about to do their swan song with coming out with In Through the Outdoor, but they spent a lot of time between albums. You had bands like Deep Purple who had broken up and gotten back together so many different times. So the rock bands weren't there. We were about to get into the disco era, which of course enveloped North America and Europe. So we're about to get into Saturday Night Fever and the Bee Gees album, and here was this one band that were still rocking and not changing their style, not changing anything, doing what they wanted. So I think they were welcomed with open arms because of what they were able to provide.
Me personally, I'd always go and see them before they went on, because I used to like stand and watch them. You know, it's an enjoyable experience. I mean, what else are you going to do with your evening? You want to go and watch AC/DC play, or you want to go and sit in the hotel bar? No, you go and watch Angus and the boys. You know, you get an education in rock and roll.
It was just a band being worked hard, obviously, by Atlantic Records, who saw their immense potential, and they were touring like nobody's business. A lot of bands, I think, would have self-destructed at that point, but that was a way of harnessing AC/DC's energy, I think, at that point. If they hadn't been on the road, if they weren't in the studio, I think they would have gone crazy. And knowing Angus, you know, he would have gone crazy. You know, he's not the sort of guy to sit there in front of the television, you know, relaxing. That's just, it's just not what he does.
Powerage was a continuation of what AC/DC did best. AC/DC never really varied the style that much on any of their albums. There's not much variation to be had in what they did, but Powerage still sounds different to Let There Be Rock, but the songs are so good. Again, Down Payment Blues, Sin City, Riff Raff, What's Next to the Moon. Again, the titles trip off your tongue, and you know with each particular title exactly what they sound like, and each song is different. Now, given the fact that variations within that style of music are very difficult to achieve, it's remarkable how AC/DC did it.
Beggar man thief, ain't got a hope in hell. That's my belief. Fingers got it. Diamond tail.
I don't think it's a bad album, it just isn't any different. So when you have 4 albums, one after the other, and then after that you have If You Want Blood, which is a blinding live album, people tend to miss it. And Dirty Deeds is a great album, and in the middle you've got this album which is okay, but it's a little bit like, we need a new album so we better do one sort of syndrome, and that's sort of Powerage. It's not a bad album anyway. Like I've always said, AC/DC don't do bad albums, but they tend now and then not to shine.
It was probably showing their influences at the time, which could have come actually because they toured America with Let There Be Rock. I think that worked very well, so it could have possibly been a little bit of the same, but I think they were still growing within themselves musically.
Of Powerage, the best track, which again appears on If You Want Blood, is Rock and Roll Damnation. It's just a great rock track. It's again will always be one they have to do. It's again quite anthemic, and it's, you know, they seem to do they always seem to get songs which have rock and roll in them. One of the few bands that can put rock and roll in a title and sound cool. It's probably the most upfront track they've done.
Everything about that album again was set up perfectly. Every song was a killer. It's a cracker. They were going through a period where they didn't make duff albums, they didn't record bad songs, and it just has that vitality about them as well. However, it also marked an end of an era. It was the end of an era when they worked with George Young and Harry Vanda as producers. They produced since day one. They've gone all the way through to this. This was to be the last studio album for a while with the band, albeit they were to come back on board at a later date. And they were to move into a new era with a different producer.
So at this point in their career, AC/DC were rattling out the albums like nobody's business. It was almost like Angus's energy was being encapsulated and allowed to breed and multiply as the albums multiplied as well. So you had Powerage, then you had Powerage being recorded for the live album If You Want Blood. So it was an endless succession, really, of AC/DC madness.
At the time, it's what everybody needed to hear was a live album from AC/DC, because that's when they really come to life, you know. The first stuff I ever heard of AC/DC was a live album, and then I bought the studio albums after that, and it was kind of like, yeah, it's good, but live is definitely what they do best.
It's a major smart move, because they'd done 3 or 4 studio albums. They needed to regroup writing-wise. They needed to have some time to breathe. They also needed to put an album out that people that gone and seen them play would connect with, and that was just a very, very cool move, and it was a very well recorded and very, very well made live album.
It was recorded in Glasgow. And this is AC/DC at their absolute best. They were a fantastic live band, and they were never better than during this era, because everything was driven forward. They were really on a high. And it's one of those albums which does capture the moment. It captures the energy, captures that time. You listen to If You Want Blood, and you actually are getting a great performance captured as it should be captured.
It's not too overdubbed, it's not too played with, it's not too technically messed with. It's really very them. I think that's one of the good things about AC/DC to me. Well, up to Highway to Hell, it was always, they were very organic, they were very straightforward, the production. It wasn't overproduced, it was very much them.
It was so energetic, just the songs on that album would come across well live because of the energy behind it, the titles, whether it be Whole Lot of Rosie, whether it be Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be.
This is where AC/DC really came of age. This is them at their very best. It was never, personally, I don't think they ever bettered it in a live setting.
It showed to the fans who hadn't yet to see them, that maybe the North American fans, what these guys could do live. And I always think that was AC/DC's strong point. They came up with great riffs. They did come up with fantastic lyrics by the time they got to Highway to Hell and Back in Black. But it was their live performance.
Just the tracks actually for the early part of the career, that's the album where they all fit together really well, and possibly even just a track listing from 1 through to the end track is where they just flow as an album.
And the album sort of emulated what you would hear live, but you still were able to see what they would do for you when you saw them live.
They were then at that point in their career where even the gimmicks were no longer gimmicks. Angus in his school uniform was now part of what they were. Angus being carried on Bond's shoulders through the audience was part of what they were. It was a wonderful sense of belonging between the audience and the band, and there was a sense of these were heroes on stage, but working class heroes. They were part of what you were as well, and you were part of what they were. And Bond was an absolute crucial element of the whole thing. He was a focus through it all.
You can just hear on that album the rawness of him, the way he holds the audience, the way he is such a great front man, and again the way that he and Angus complement each other. You know, that it's like it's their show. You go and see the whole band, but it's kind of like they're the main people you go and see.
It sounds very unfair to say, but I don't think you can really comment on the individual members of AC/DC to any great extent outside Angus and Bon, and that's not to criticise them, because Angus and Bon are two very, very large and life characters, and I think if you had any more than that, it would just be completely overwhelming.
Malcolm Young on rhythm guitar, Cliff Williams bass, Phil Rudd drums, and before that Mark Evans on bass, were an absolute rock solid foundation. They gave such a tremendous sense of backing that you could almost lean against what they did, and it was metronomic, but by being so in the background, as it were, it allowed Bon and Angus to do what they did, which was to be charismatic, to produce the flurries of guitar technique, to produce those sort of performances, knowing that they have that backing. It's a solid rock behind it.
Cliff Williams and Malcolm Young and Phil Rudd, they don't want to be center of attention. They just wanted to play their music and sit in the back, which is what they did. Had all 5 of them been trying to entertain you, it would have been too much.
AC/DC had toured a lot in America before Highway to Hell, and they'd made inroads. They sold a reasonable number of albums, but at that point they weren't big time. And it was initially the pressure, I'm sure, from the American record label, who saw that they could be big time, who saw that here was a band who could sell 1 million albums, that persuaded them to go with another producer, to try something a little different.
Vanda and Young had gone as far as they could, Powerage, etc., etc. They'd done Dirty Deeds, they've done as much as they could, and there was time for a change.
This is the album that started off with Eddie Kramer, I believe, for 3 weeks, and they ended up sacking him. That was because Atlantic insisted they worked with Eddie Kramer. He had a big rep. They wanted to put together a big album that was going to be groundbreaking, so there was a lot riding on it. They spent 3 weeks in studio in Miami, Florida, and then they sacked him.
And then Robert John Mutt Lange came into the picture.
He took over the helm of making Highway to Hell. His style is completely different to any other rock producers in the business. He didn't co-write any of the material, which is what he did with Def Leppard. But what he did was to completely change the way of making records. He's a more meticulous producer. He is much more finicky. He's much more involved in arrangements, and he's much more involved musically. In other words, backing vocals change, vocal arrangements change, guitar arrangements change, everything changes. He makes a record in a completely different way from anyone else. Even though his complete production style hadn't developed, this was his first true rock album.
More than anything else, he and Bon Scott hit it off. They really did ally themselves, and I think that probably 2 reasons there. One was Bon finally felt that there was a producer in place who could bring out the enormous potential in the band without affecting their sound. And Mutt Lange saw in Bon Scott someone who really did have a genuine genius.
He took the band by the scruff of the neck and changed the rules. He made this album accessible to the Americans. He's a fine tuner of a record, a tuner. Sonically, he had his head totally around what was needed. The whole game changed. From then on in, they would never be the same.
Highway to Hell was the album that made AC/DC superstars. It showed their maturity as musicians. It showed the great lyrics. The lyrics weren't so tongue-in-cheek on this album.
And it was perhaps a little bit more serious, but not completely serious, but it just had that edge to it. And it's one of those classic albums where there's not a bad song on it at all.
It was well recorded, the songs were great. Bon, I think, was at the height of his powers, you know, even though he was probably pretty much out of control at that point, and the drinking was you know, taking its toll.
So Highway to Hell represents really a producer taking AC/DC's sound, slightly smoothing it, but not too much, allowing the melody to come through, but also encouraging the songwriter, the lyricist, i.e. Bon, to really push himself further than anywhere before.
I think he brought out the best in them, and it's all there. You know, when you listen to it, the guitars are very clear, very punchy. The drums are, you know, the kick drum is nice and punchy as well, and then the bass is nice and fat, and it just has their sound to it. You know, which is why I think it was different from all the other albums, because it was just that little bit more polished. You know, it didn't sound. It still had the rawness to it because that's the way the songs are written, you know, but in terms of production, it just sounded that little bit clearer and crisper, you know.
That's an album I'm not so hot on. It did get rave reviews and stuff like that, but just personally I don't think it had all the killer songs. I personally think Let There Be Rock and If You Want Blood, You've Got It. The two albums that came before it were the actual killer albums. They were always rock, but sort of bluesy based rock, and this was trying to take it, maybe make it a bit more popperized a little bit with the sort of backing vocals and that sort of stuff. But I think that could have been one of the reasons it didn't work. For me, that is.
There's a lot of people that say that the backing vocals tend to warm up and sort of take away the direction of Bond's vocals. In other words, tends to make things look a little bit soft when, you know, he's always had quite a hard approach to things. I tend not to think that. I tend to think that this is such an early stage in Mutt's development of that sound that I think you got it at the best, because he went on to be much, much smoother, and he went on to smooth things out even more. So I honestly think that I think it worked really well. I think that's what made it successful.
They were trying new things, and I think it did lose a bit of its just straight out ballsy rock.
The opening chords of the title track, which opens the album, you know you're listening to something that's monumental, and it really has a sense of rhythm, it has a sense of style, it has a sense of personality. It took what they did before on Powerage and Let There Be Rock and just took it up to another level in terms of production and in terms of performance. I think the band were performing better than they had done on record before.
And with the song Highway to Hell, it's, in a way, it's like Whole Lotta Rosie, where it has that punchy guitar line from the start, and then there's a gap. You know, with Highway to Hell, it comes in. It's just an A to a D with an F sharp in the bass, and then to a G. And again, it's just the way it's done. It just, when you listen to it on the album, it just has that real quality about it. It's the opening track of the album, and it's like, here we are, and this is what we do, and it's just another classic riff.
Probably Highway to Hell might be one of the greatest rock riffs of all time. As soon as you hear that, out comes the air guitar.
And so after that riff has rolled around quite a few times, on the last time it then moves to the E and into the chorus, which is, again, the chorus chords are just A, D, G, D. But I'll play it so it sort of goes from what would be the verse, so it goes.
Touched him up, shot down in flames, girls got rhythm, beating about the bush, Night Prowler. You just go on and on and on. It just so many great songs on that record.
I don't think their ambitions were to create some sort of magnum opus in the studio. They just wanted to capture the AC/DC epic as best they could, then get out on the road again. Their mentality isn't like they want to be all professional and classy and stuff, because that's not them. It's just, they just happen to have the right combination on that album and
had gone to the next phase.
And every single song of that album was played on North American radio, on FM radio. They would play every track, and to this day you can still play every track because every track is a brilliant song on Highway to Hell.
It made their career because it was the first massive record in America, and the one that followed it was probably one of the biggest selling rock albums of all time.
Highway to Hell is a real high mark because of the way it was produced, the sense of melody and rhythm and passion meeting.
Touch Too Much, a fantastic track from the album. They performed on Top of the Pops literally a couple weeks before Bon Scott was found dead. So they were riding still this big wave of this classic album.
When he died in February 1980, it was a massive blow to everybody, to the fans, more especially of course to the band.
He just liked to rock and roll and drink. Not a bad life. Just ended too early really for me.
Keep on riding. Riding on and 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 on.
99 out of 100 bands would not have recovered from that. But AC/DC was such a strong band and such a strong brand at that point that they were able to carry on.
One of these days. One of these days.
You've got people that would say, oh, you could never replace Bon, you know, but what does Angus do? Go off and form a folk band?
They knew they had to carry on. I think if they didn't do that right away, they might have gone back to Australia and maybe never continued on. They couldn't hold their head in their hands about Bon because I think they expected that to happen. Whether they could prevent it, probably not.
There was never going to be another Bon Scott, but the band splitting up wasn't going to bring him back. And it wasn't going to diminish what he had achieved if they carried on.
They considered the future, but you know, you move on. And I think with Bon's attitude, the way Bon would be was like, well, replace me.
All the groundwork had been done with the Bon lineup. AC/DC, you know, were poised for great things, which they subsequently went on to achieve without him. And with Brian Johnson in the lineup,
I think they did it in the greatest respect to Bon. They found the right singer with Brian, and my God, what a difficult job Brian had to do, you know?
it's extraordinary really, because Bon died in February 1980. Back in Black came out, I believe, in the summer of that year, in July. So Back in Black's definitely got a flavour of Bon on there. You know, whether you accept the claims that Bon's lyrics are on there or not.
Because they demoed the album while Bon Scott was still alive, you know, you can almost hear him on there sometimes. You can hear him singing that melody or that vocal line or something, you know. And Brian Johnson always seemed a weird choice to get, because whereas Bon Scott was very sort of, had a gravelly kind of voice, Brian Johnson was always very high-pitched screaming kind of thing, you know, which is, I think, perhaps what put some people off at first. But I think he can still sing all the classic AC/DC stuff just as well.
Bon Scott's singing about these women in his life that had given him the dose, that had broke his heart, all the hearts he broke. Him singing about it, you believed because it came from him. So when Brian Johnson would sing the songs, they weren't his songs to sing. Those earlier, and I for me, a whole lot of Rosie, it has to be Bon Scott.
AC/DC fans will have their pro-Brian camps and their pro-Bon camps. And it's unfair to compare the two, really, because they're almost two different bands, really. You know, Brian Johnson's a completely different frontman to Bon Scott.
Personally, speaking on a personal point of view, I've never seen AC/DC with Brian Johnson, and I don't want to. And it's not negative to Brian at all, not anti-Brian Johnson. It's just that I don't feel that they could have replaced someone who was so special and important on stage, but I respect their right for doing it.
Bon's contribution to AC/DC just cannot be overestimated. You know, he was the guy that dragged Angus and his chums along with him, you know, through those barroom brawls and into the stadiums of America. You know, he did it, you know, in tandem with those guys. But without Bon, I'm not too sure what would have happened with AC/DC.